method analysis of doing that. I can tell you that when I was a graduate student, if you had had an event like this in the biomedical sciences, people would have said, what are you talking about? Nobody would come because everybody did a postdoc. Almost everybody did a postdoc. It was just what you did. That's not always been the case in physical sciences and engineering. So if we have people here from chemistry or BME, I know that in those, or physics, a lot of times people get hired directly into companies from the PhD, and that's been going on for a long time. But in biomedical sciences, industry generally hired people who already had postdoctoral experience, and that's definitely changed in the last 10 or 15 years. And it's made for a real choice for everybody completing a PhD in this field is to make that decision, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to turn over to Harinder. I'll join in at times, but glad to see a big audience here, and we look forward to some good questions and answers during the talk. So,
thank you, David.
well, thank you to Lauren for organizing the food and the signups.
Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me. Well, as David mentioned, I was invited to give a talk on this topic of to postdoc or not, given that, I have background in PhD, postdoc, and then I served as a program director for GPS STEM, and now I'm in medical education, purely academic track. And this question gets asked a lot, not only outside of UCI, but even within UCI, when people are ready to graduate, they're like, do you think I should do a postdoc because I want to get into industry? And also, some people might have unique situations based on the immigration status that sometimes people like, I just want to buy a little bit of time until things get sorted out, the government changes and the new person comes in who will be a little bit more nice to us, sort of a situation. So I think it's a question which comes up all the time, and we've always been just kind of like anecdotally, here and there, mentioning that to students who contacts us instead of really doing a whole event on this. So that's why the idea was to kind of like really give you a lay of the land as to where do we stand right now in terms of postdoctoral training, where our PhD is going compared to how it used to be in the past, and what are the latest job trends. And if you decide to go either way, postdoc or not a postdoc, you should make an informed decision on as to where you want to go. That's very important. We'll also kind of talk about a couple of examples where we had people who went on the other side, not the dark side, the bright side, and then they came back to the dark or the bright side, whatever. So just this is the image when I was looking on Google Images, just to look for PhD, postdoc life and all that, this one popped up. I'm like, this is perfect and most appropriate to describe at least, what our understanding of postdoc is. So a little bit about me. Let's see if this one moves forward. Yeah. So a little bit about me. I got my PhD at Temple in cardiovascular, switched, or I would rather say defaulted into postdoc because I didn't know anything else. I didn't know what else to do. My institution did not have any avenues for career professional development. There was no NIH-based GPS STEM program there. And people didn't even know, we didn't even know where our alumni is. When I asked my PI and other people in the department, I said, do you know where our PhD students went? They're like, I don't know. And it just so happens that not only the PIs did not keep track, but then, students did not want to stay in touch. For reasons could be they didn't get what they were looking for, or they're working in an industry which is totally different from where they got their, academic PhD training from. And after that, I defaulted into postdoctoral training. But what I really did, I did 4 years of postdoc. I made the best out of that postdoctoral training. I got involved in Postdoc Association. We started a nonprofit in Chicago. Since this was in Chicago, we called it as Scientists, Chicago-based scientists, which became really popular amongst academics because otherwise we would just go to a bar and just talk about how difficult and how miserable my life is. And it's like, how about we make a platform where everyone comes together and complains about it? And then that ended up being, that we did an event at one of those, the science incubators. And these are all like startup professionals, industry professionals. They saw our event and they're like, is that okay if we join your event? And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, yes, sure. So they started coming in, they said, can we use your platform as a networking organization to find talent? So that ended up being Scientists. It's still going on. And then while I was in postdoctoral training, I realized that, there's a lot more which needs to be done. So I joined this nonprofit called Future of Research. This came out of Boston. these are all, I wouldn't say disgruntled postdocs, but then these are postdocs who wanted to do something different by, using their scientific expertise and scientific methodology on how to bring about a change in the culture in academia. And I think that's what got me hired here at GPS STEM UCI. When David and I talked, we'll interviews, a couple of interviews later, he's like, when are you starting? I'm like, oh my God, are you not going to invite me to California to see the beautiful weather from Chicago? He's like, no, you're hired, just come, let me know when you start. And then from there, like having spent a couple of years in GPS STEM, my interests changed and evolved, and I got interested in medical education. And that's what I do on the School of Medicine side. I teach pre-clerkship first-year medical students on physiology and immunology. So this should be a perfect example of how, your path is not going to be linear. And I had no plans. I didn't even know this is where I would be after so many years. So keep that in mind. This is not one track. Your career is not going to be one line. David, you want to quickly talk about you? You've been more successful in academia than I am, and more linear path maybe because you started early.
Yeah, so it wasn't entirely linear. So when I was a graduate student in the environment where I trained, and I think that was generally true throughout the country, the idea was that if you wanted to be a serious scientist, your goal was to become an academic scientist at a university or a research institute. And that at some point, if you didn't publish enough or if things didn't go great, that you would go into industry as a backup. And that could happen out of your postdoc. It could happen out of junior faculty, pre-tenure. It could happen after you have tenure if you're not getting grants anymore. At some point, if you're not succeeding in the academic world, industry was a place to land where you could continue to do science and draw a paycheck and go to meetings and all that kind of stuff. There was really, industry was had an important role in society, but wasn't the ideal destination for doing cutting edge research. And so I followed that path. I did a postdoc nearby where I had done the graduate work at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in the Harvard medical area. And then I went on the job market with a science paper and thought I was going to get hired at a bunch of prestigious universities, and I got 0 offers on the first try, the first year of interviewing with what I thought was a pretty strong CV. I needed some more seasoning, some more mentoring, but I had to move because my wife got a job in Southern California, or I wanted to move with her. And fortunately, I was able to find a lab at UCLA that took me in. I spent another year there. And at that point, I was considering industry, considering academia, something in Southern California. And this position came open at UCI, and I was happy to take it, and I've been here ever since. But throughout the time I've been here, I've considered whether industry would be a new challenge, a new pathway for me, and that's because I work with industry a lot and have done for the last 15 years. And what I've learned is that compared to when I worked in industry before graduate school, or the people I knew in industry in graduate school, it's a totally different world. Some of the smartest people I know, smartest scientists I know, are in industry and started there from their PhD or at any other point. It wasn't the backup or the fallback position. They have resources that we don't have. They have a lot of different paths. If you don't want to do research, you can do business development, or there's all kinds of places you can go, project management. And so I think that industry can be a really exciting destination for people who are serious about research and want to develop and even publish. And so I think that both paths are really excellent paths for people who are passionate about science. And that's what we try to support in GPS Biomed and GPS STEM. But there still are important differences between academia and industry we'll go through today. And there is the opportunity to move in either direction. There's some faculty here who established careers in industry and now are research grant funded faculty here at UCI. So it can happen in the other direction as well. It's much more fluid. So I guess
you rarely hear that from a faculty member, right? Okay, so before we move forward, I want to keep it very lively and engaging, and I want you to participate in this process. So let's go to slido.com phone, scan it, and tell me what comes to your mind when you think about the word postdoc, whether it's a word or experiences, what you see, what you've heard, what you see in your lab, who's going through this postdoctoral training. Just type in your responses and it should be good. Okay, perfect. More school, low salary. Broke. Not in UC system, actually. Stress, exhausting, more school, sadness, poverty, more school, endless. Independent, I like that one. Not another PhD training. Yeah, I mean, depending on how long you spend, it could be another second PhD. David, I should start giving second PhD. Publications, substitute PI, papers, I don't know what. Faculty track, no work-life balance, only for future PIs, long-term, moving, the grind continues. The work-life balance, is it altered? There was something I saw long. Yeah. Okay, I guess all of your, put in your thoughts.
I need to say something. The 5 years I spent as postdoc were the best 5 years of my entire scientific career. I can get into that later, but it's not all grind and sadness. You don't have to take classes. All you do is research. You don't have to write animal protocols, teach, any of that stuff. It's great.
Well, so great responses. I think, that would pretty much like summarize what we think about postdoc, when this word comes to our mind and what we hear from people. So let's see how National Postdoc Association, this is an association nonprofit which is working for postdocs. How do they describe postdocs? And this is a definition which, has evolved and come up after many years. What they say is a postdoc scholar is an individual holding a doctoral degree who's engaged in temporary period of mentored research and or scholarly training for the purpose of acquiring professional skills needed to pursue a career path of his or her choosing. How does that resonate with the actual, what the idea, what all the things you came across, right? It's very different, right? So the postdoc positions itself has changed over the period of time. And I think as David mentioned, there's ups and downs, and a lot of it depends on the funding scenario. A lot of depends on how industry is doing, if it's industry's hiring or firing, and that would actually, cause glut of postdocs, or like a lot of postdocs, you're not being able to find postdoc, which is something what we are facing right now. Now, let's see how this actually relates to the data out there. Is, some of the things which they're mentioning is true. So this is an image which came out of 2012 NSF data on basically tracking people, PhDs, where do they go? So I'll just use this. So at least in 2012 and 2014, when this infographic was made, this is the number of PhD students who were there in the United States. And every year there are around 16,000 students who are getting into biology PhD programs. This is from more than 10 years ago. The number has increased significantly. At that time, 7 years was the average amount of time students were spending in their PhD degree, but that has come down significantly. It's, I think, around like close to maybe 5, depending on institution and lab and all that. There's a lot of checks and balances in place now to make sure that you don't stay here forever. Now, 37% of them, they do not do postdoc. Around 30% is the one, maybe 7%, they just probably like don't finish PhD, but 30% don't do a postdoc. And around 70% of them, they basically get into postdoctoral training. Now, many of them could be because I want to do this, because I want to become something in academia, or a lot of them are probably like me who defaulted, didn't know anything better, or because of any other reasons due to like temporary status. Now, at that time, there were 37 to 68,000 postdocs. This is a big number, big range, 37 to 68, right? Because we had no data on tracking postdocs, how many postdocs we have. When I was part of Future Research, we asked institutions, how many postdocs do you have? And one institution came up, they said, we only have 2 postdocs. And this was one of the biggest universities. I'm like, how is that even possible? They said, oh, well, you mean postdoctoral scholar, postdoctoral research assistant, research scholar, project scientist. So postdocs exist in so many different titles that it is very difficult to track postdocs. And also this number also includes folks who are doing their 2nd or 3rd postdocs. This also does not include, this data is only from PhD students who are PhDs who are coming from United States. There are a lot of folks who are coming from international PhDs who are joining the workforce in the United States and becoming postdoc. So average number of years, like, really it was around 5 years, but then that's not adding to how many other postdocs they might have done, or if they had any postdocs back in their home country. Now, out of that, 15% of PhDs basically transition into tenure track faculty positions. This is from that time, the number keeps changing. But it's always between, I would say, 10 to 30%. That's kind of like it's been the range for fluctuation. And out of that, 18% of them got into academic but non-research faculty tenure track positions. And we'll talk about a little bit about what sort of positions are there, and teaching is one of them. And rest all basically transition to all these multiple, many different job tech sectors, industry, government, nonprofit. So going back to NPA's definition, so which is a temporary period. I mean, we don't even know where they are, how many postdocs there are, and how much time they're spending. So this is really not a temporary training. Minimum, I would say, minimum time people have spent in their postdoc training when you're seeing faculty recruitments is around 5. Am I right? And that's the amount of time, when you're really a productive postdoc, you come in, you hit the ground running, you must have a really good PhD, or you found a really good postdoc and you got grants and you're very active. And that's how you really make the best out of those 5 years and getting to be able to be a faculty candidate and competitive faculty candidate. Now, let's see, why do people actually do a postdoc? Let's get into that reasoning. First thing we talked about, that you want to be a faculty, right? That's what we think, I'm going to do PhD, I'm going to do postdoc, A leads to B, B leads to C, and therefore I need to do that in order for me to go from A to C. This is what I have to do, postdoc. Postdoc is also an opportunity to look for independence in research. This is where you're going to have a lot of freedom of ideas and projects and experiments you can do on your own most of the times. And I'm not going to talk about the places where you're not able to because you're just asked to just run like a lab rat. There's also independence in writing your own fellowship. You can decide about what fellowship you would like to write, and you will have time to do that because you're not taking any classes, you don't have any commitments, you don't have any thesis committee meetings, there's not requirement on the qualifier exam stuff and all that. So that really adds to that independence and the time you have. Then I wrote that, enjoy being your own boss. When I wrote that, David read that and like, what do you mean? Like, are postdocs bossing around in the lab? I guess, what I meant was, this is an opportunity to mentor. Maybe some people like, well, I was bossing around, I need to do that now. But I think this is really a great opportunity to mentor and serve as a supervisor, which is a really important skill for you to have, not only to be in academia if you become PI, but also to get into industry, that supervisory experience. Higher salary, for sure, it's higher than grad school salary, but it's slightly higher, and I mentioned if you're in UC system, probably like it's significantly higher now. And we'll get into that how that is actually posing a challenge for PIs to first maybe find the right candidates, or actually being able to really, that competition going on because the bar is going up and up. There are people like me, 70%, defaulting to postdocs because we didn't know. But I think that still has a silver lining, because what I learned during that process, I don't think I would be here, or I would be prepared for all the more things which I want to do if I had not gone through postdoctoral training. Now, where do postdocs work? There are multiple different sectors, where postdocs work. And this is a question which gets asked, and not a lot of information exists out there. Well, there is an industry hires postdocs. It was always, we knew at least 10, 12 years ago, Pfizer, Novartis, Genentech, they had the postdoctoral programs. But more and more companies, industry, pharmaceutical industry, biotech industry, are now offering postdoctoral training positions. And these positions we'll talk about, they vary in length, and they have a lot of different variables. They're very different from what is offered in academia. There's also national labs where you can do postdoctoral training, where things are slightly different from academia and much different than industry. So keep in mind that industry also offer postdocs positions. So let's look at it one by one. What are some of the differences? Also salary, academic salary. So I didn't want to be absolute good, bad, or whatever, but it varies also, what you're expecting and where you are. So let's look at the salary. In academia, salary compared to industry is less. Industry pays a lot better if you're a postdoc. And I remember this was probably like, 15 years ago, when one of us had graduated, and right after they got into postdoc in industry, and I think that was Pfizer, and that person's salary at that time was 65 or 70 or 75. And the NIH scale at that time was still 36 or 38. So that was almost a double the difference. I don't know what's the difference right now, but this is a big jump in salary. National lab is probably around the same, maybe slightly higher than, these, our academic institutions. independence in academia postdoc and industry postdoc. In academia, there is, I would say there's a lot of independence, for sure, it depends on many different factors. We'll get into that, what you should keep in mind when you decide to get into those places where you can get independence. There's a lot more independence in academic postdoc compared to the industry postdoc. That varies depending on how much funding they have, how excited they're about research, and which is project oriented. And if they see really a clinical trials getting in, and they see light at the end of the tunnel, they'll put everything in there and they'll go full steam, and then you'll probably have a lot of independence or not independence, because you really need to work on that narrow thing, because they want, it's a product and output oriented field. And national labs, there I would say like it's maybe, there's a lot of basic science kind of work which happens in national labs also. Job security in academia, people might say that it's very secure. Yes, it is compared to industry. And, again, depending on what factors you're taking into account, but it's still dependent on your PI's grant most of the time. I'm not talking about UC system. When you come into UC system, I think there's a year or two, you're kind of secured, but you still need to, work. You can't just sit there and do nothing and get salary. But then it's still dependent on your PI salary, and, contract gets renewed, that kind of a thing. The same thing happens in industry also. But then that depends on how much money they have and how things are moving forward. Let's say if nothing works out, they do not hesitate. Overnight, people get fired and the project gets trashed, and then you are on the street. Or, they have mechanisms, severance package, or you may get absorbed into a different unit, but then that can be really a shock compared to how things happen in academia. In terms of work, in academia, most of the times it's basic. There's translation work also going on, clinical research also. But compared to industry, it's mostly translation. They're very output oriented, product oriented. We want to get this product out because that's going to generate this much of revenue. And they're going to put in money into research, R&D, and on you only because they see a big output of revenue out of it. Work environment depends. Could be most of the times which here in academia is territorial, but then I have come across labs where people are very, very collaborative, and those are things you have to keep in mind. In industry, it's very, very highly collaborative. When you are doing research, there are people who are working with you. The protocols are written really literally like as if one of my industry friend used to tell me, if a monkey walks in and you give them a pipette, they can look at the protocol and they can actually replicate your experiment. And that's how detailed and really collaborative they are. One person does the experiments, you design the experiments. People come and plug in different sort of parts of the assembly line, if you can say. And when it comes to publication, that goes to a totally separate publication unit. And within the publication unit also, there are different parts. Somebody does the stats, somebody takes care of making the figures, somebody's making the infographic. So they all have to work together to make sure that, that work is done and the publication is out. In terms of career development avenues, academia probably was not that famous once upon a time, but I think things are changing, given that we're all sitting here and exploring avenues, learning about different careers. That's a perfect example. Industry has a lot more. By that, what I mean is that you are basically rubbing shoulders with people who are in like MSLs, medical writers, field application scientists, business development associate, product development associate, and you're doing research in the lab. And so you can always learn from these people. And then if you want to get absorbed, if you see that you're going to get fired or this unit is going to shut down, you can always go and transition to that. In terms of duration of postdocs and duration of academic postdoc, average is 5, you could range. I know people who've done 10, 12 years of postdoc and then they got into faculty position, but I think that the chances of getting that really starts to go down significantly. But in industry, this is usually a very short postdoctoral training, and you do that just, you come in and become part of the project. And then most of the times people after 2 to 3 years, they either go somewhere else in some other company. They don't do postdoc anymore. They either become group leaders or they go do something else within the company and not being postdocs. They may become research scientists or scientist positions, but not really postdocs. Now, let's look at this one. Let me go to the other one. So I want to ask you all to see. Let's see.
Question.
Oh, is there a question? Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
What's the duration of the position?
Where? Anywhere? David?
So for people who who are looking for academic careers, it usually takes about 5 years. It's not always one postdoc, but usually when a lab hires a postdoc, they're on 1-year contracts, but it's expected that they're gonna probably spend 2 or 3 years. And if they can get some sort of fellowship or transitional grant, a K award on the last couple of years, then they can stay longer. But most labs don't have a 5-year funding horizon, so they'll hire a postdoc hoping they'll be there for 2 or 3 years. And that's should be plenty if you're destined to go to industry. But if you want to go to academia, the hope is you'll continue on developing more in that lab, or you might have to go to a second lab. Does that answer the question?
Yes, indeed.
I have a follow-up to that. Is that across different schools or is it specific to like biology?
I'm not sure what it's like in, probably stand up. Question is, are postdocs longer or shorter in non-biomedical sciences like chemistry or physics or biomedical engineering? I think in general for faculty positions, you're looking at a minimum of 3 years and some independent publications and a track record of grant success in getting grants to get a faculty position. But 4 or 5 is more common. Universities invest a lot in junior faculty. It's a big investment in risk. And so to de-risk it, you look for people who have a long track record of publishing, innovative scholarship, and grant success. But if your goal in doing a postdoc is to just get more training, have an experience of independence, but ultimately go into industry, I would say 2 or 3 years is enough time to gather that kind of experience that'll help you succeed to a greater extent in industry. So I don't think 5 years is at all necessary if you're sure you don't want to stay in academia.
Okay, so this was a question, is the postdoctoral training required to be for non-academic years? A majority of you, 70% of you say no, it is not required. Some of you are not sure. Only 3% think yes. So let's dissect it out and see how what the data says. The data says when you look at, this was a 2017 publication, which really became kind of myth buster in terms of what people believe for a long time. In this study, what they did was they tracked people 10 years after they received their PhD, and then they went and surveyed people in different job sectors and see how many of them actually had done postdoc. For sure, for obvious reasons, people who were in academia, tenure track, they had done postdoctoral training, this much percentage, compared to very few people who had done no postdoc, they were still tenure track faculty. The point being, these were probably people who were seasoned folks, 1995 and before the data. And there were times where you were not required to do postdoc, or even if you were doing postdoc, it was not called postdoc. It used to be, the postdoc, basically the whole thing originated as being a sabbatical. You finish your PhD, your job as faculty member is secured in your department. Let's go somewhere in the middle of nowhere and do some research, sabbatical, and we'll come back. That was the model, and now it has become a postdoctoral training. Now, when they looked at the industry and non-government and other careers, for sure, like a large majority of people had not done a postdoctoral training. And so basically, same was the case in, when you looked at academic non-research, they had also done no postdoctoral training. David, you want to add something into this figure?
I guess, yeah, there's another figure from this paper that shows the salaries. And for people who were in industry after 15 years, if they went straight from PhD into industry, their starting salaries were much higher than those who did academic postdoc. As you got closer to 10, 15 years out, those numbers for people who were now in industry were closer and eventually met, but those who had done an academic postdoc never exceeded the median salary of those who had not. And I think that was one of the data points that really made people think, why, if I know I want to go to industry, not only can I get a job there, but I don't have a ceiling, That said, I talk to a lot of people I know in industry, and they say they prefer to hire scientists who have done a postdoc, whether it's in industry or academia, that they succeed, they think more independently and they succeed better. That's anecdotal. This is data from 2017. So I don't know. I think the majority of you said you don't need a postdoc to get a job in industry. That's certainly true today. that people get hired at six-figure salaries or more with a PhD, yeah, without having done a postdoc and find success. So.
And the other thing to keep in mind, again, what sort of industry job you're getting into. If you're getting into an R&D position, for sure, I think, they know that when you're a PhD student, most of the times you don't have that much of independence. You come in and you're given a project, you do that, you get out. But then when you're in industry, you still need to have a lot of, significant degree of independence. And a postdoctoral training will basically give you that. And the other thing is, when you look at hiring managers and people who are group leaders in research units in an industry, these people are basically really very successful scientists who've published a lot, who've done postdoc for sure, who were at the verge of getting faculty positions in academia, but they decided to go the industry route for whatever reasons, whether it's fast-paced, more salary, or family reasons. So when you get interviewed by faculty, by hiring managers and industry for R&D position, most of the times you'll see these days that these people have PhD and postdoctoral, and they will be looking for you, how successful you were as a PhD student. One question which we get asked a lot is that, oh, I am not interested in academia, therefore I'm not going to put a lot of effort in writing grants and writing papers and all that, because that's not what industry looks for. That trend has changed. If you want to do R&D, or even if you want to do something else, the yardstick by which your success of your PhD is measured is if you have published. Don't go in without having any publication. If you have a grant or fellowship, for sure, that's going to help. Not only to get into the job, but also to be successful at the job, because the amount of writing you will be doing doesn't matter what aspect of industry you get into, that'll involve a lot of training, which if you've gotten that thing during your PhD training, that would be really useful. And postdoc will basically, give you those opportunity and independence to get that, the independence to basically write those fellowship and choose fellowship. Yes.
There was a question in the chat about your last chart there.
Mm-hmm.
If our percentage is broken up by column or by color.
These are broken up by color.
As you said, if approximately 30% of academic tenure track had postdocs and only 10 did not, who are the other 60?
I think, yeah,
We should go back and read the paper again.
Yeah.
We can link
But,
the paper.
I think all the red bars add up to 1 and all the blue bars add up to 1. So,
I think that's, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, now, so why some PhDs don't do a postdoc, this is another important topic. You might have different preferences that you're looking for more money, academia, that it doesn't pay a lot, but maybe eventually it does pay. But in the short run, there's not a lot of money. And if you're not interested, well, I was reading this paper, this book, which some, people, authors of, Beyond the Ivory Tower and all that. They wrote that there are 2 pools of students who get into PhD programs. One who want to get PhD to get into faculty or industry and all that, use that PhD to get somewhere. There are other people who really want to stay in, well, the first, which just wants to get PhD to get into industry or do something outside of academia. The other pool, which wants to stay in academia. So if you're one of those, there are a lot of people who just come in, they just want a degree and do something else with it, not stay in academia. That could be the reason why people don't do a postdoc. If you are interested in more applied translational fast-paced research, product development-based, product-oriented research, then that's another reason why people do not do a postdoc and they just finish PhD and straight get into industry. But again, you really need to be sure about what do you really want to do? Why do you really want to do postdoc? Don't just default into postdoc and do something. Now, maybe I'm going to skip this one just in the interest of time, but I want to show you data on as to where PhDs are right now. This is a data from, I believe this year or the end of last year. This is how the trend of job trends have been for STEM PhDs. Compared to 1992 and 2022, the number of PhDs who are working in academia, that has come down significantly, in spite of the fact that large number of PhDs are graduating, every year compared to 92. And a large number of that compared to 92 is now actually getting into industry position. All these yellow ones you see, these are the people who probably were in K to 12 or college teaching and all that. That number has also gone down significantly. I don't know what the reasons are, but I believe that maybe because in PhD we become so super specialized and we become so disconnected from, going back and teaching in the school level. When you have to break down concepts to school level, it's really hard for a PhD. I wonder if that's the reason which is playing there. So these are the latest job trends. Large majority of folks are getting into industry positions now. Now, another question. So I'm basically bringing up all the questions which I received past 4 years, and then all the other questions which were asked to me when I was giving this talk. The question which asked is like, okay, I'm interested in getting into academia and exploring, industry and doing a postdoc in industry. But what if I'm not able to come back? What if I really like academia after having spent some time in industry? Is this possible to come back? And David has an example of that, live example, but look, this is what I have learned from industry folks and people who have done this back and forth. Yes, it depends. You can do back and forth. It depends. If you're a research group leader or a postdoc in academia, you can go to industry and you can easily come back because then you have all the research skills you needed to get into industry, and the same thing gets used in industry. You can come back to academia. When you're in industry, this is another question people ask, can I publish? Yes, you publish. You can publish as a first author. The other thing is if you're a core facility manager, if you manage a certain facility or you're expert in a technique, you get into industry and you can come back into academia. We've seen these examples. If there are some non-scientific roles and all that, which is like writing or something, though that's where, it really probably will vary depending on maybe not a large company, smaller companies, but you're looking for someone with an expertise from academia. If you're doing something, if you've done, like, let's say my kind of position from GPS STEM, I wanted to get into industry and I'm not involved in research for past many years, but then they had like a really good position, which perfectly aligns with what I've done in the past. David, you have an example from one of the students, I think, postdoc?
We have a postdoc in our T32 training program who was a PhD student here and went into industry for about 1.5 years and made some good money, but didn't really like the environment and wanted some more training, and came back and was competitive for a spot in our T32 program and has been thriving here. So that's possible. The hardest thing is if you're long past the postdoc period and you've been working as a group leader in industry and you want to come back to academia, because to get a faculty job, you need to have a research program that's fundable. And usually you can't bring that with you from the company. So it does happen, but it takes a while for that person to get established, and the university has to make an investment and hope that they're bringing some idea that's fundable.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I do know some examples from my postdoc training. There was someone who right after, I think they did postdoc and got into industry, and they were a group leader in the industry for quite some time. And after that, they came back to academia. And in academia, they were probably bringing in some money from industry collaborations, which they were able to, because of which they were able to get into academic position. And also the kind of work this person was doing was really going to fast track and accelerate in academia because of that in industry collaborations. So that's one example where I think, can be really, really useful. Yes.
I've heard, I don't know if it's true, is that sometimes people who work in industry can be hired by universities to teach a few classes on the side. Does that happen a lot, or is that very?
It used to happen a lot. All of my organic chem professors when I was in college were from a local pharmaceutical company because nobody wanted to teach OChem. But I don't think it's as common anymore. It may depend on the part of the country. Yeah.
I just want to say, I think it can be fairly common to pick up university, maybe not like our one university like this, but I went to a Cal State for my undergrad, and primarily the one teaching the classes were either retired from industry or currently working at industry like
So maybe that was a teaching or research based person.
Yeah, so it's like not that research isn't going on, but the graduate program is not really existent. Like there's no PhDs or maybe a few master's programs, but yeah.
There are a lot of adjunct appointments also where somebody's an expert and they're interested in teaching a couple of classes undergrad. I don't know about grad program, but for sure, like, and I think GPS 10, we've had some folks who are industry leaders and expert and who are seasoned folks in this thing. Consulting was one example. They came and taught some classes as guest lecturers. I think because they were the best people on that topic, which you could, who you could bring Because in academia, you're so much involved into academic research that, and tying it to the industry and seeing the application aspect, those people who are on the other side can do better. Let's see, so let's say now you decide to do a postdoc, let's say now, okay, well, all those reasons are gone, you kind of have a better understanding that you really want to do a postdoc for a lot of reasons which we mentioned. How do you really make sure that, you're getting into a good postdoctoral environment? First, you have to, when you apply for a postdoc, you check to see how much of independence you're probably going to get into that postdoctoral lab. Make sure that this person has funding to sustain you and afford you for a certain duration of time. And the work environment and lab culture. Never, well, I have heard instances where you go for a postdoctoral interview and after you give a talk and you're all sitting in the conference room having lunch, PI gets out for a second, the door closes and the people in the lab says, do not come here. So red flags, always look for those. There will be many. So I think, that's the best way to, assess, and going there, you'll give you that information.
That happened to me when I was looking for a postdoc. So I didn't accept that one, but does anybody know how to find out if a lab has funding? Without asking them?
NIH reporter?
Right, but that's not the only funding agency, but hopefully they'll have at least one NIH grant, but that's the best way to start finding out. They usually often put it on the other awards on their website.
So the mentoring environment, that becomes another important thing. You want to be working with someone who really is a good mentor, who not only supports you to that, be hands-off. I think sometimes we say if someone is hands-on, they're a bad PI. Someone who's hands-off, they're a good PI. That's actually not true. I would say, someone who's hands-off is also a bad PI, or not keeping in mind that how to train you and mentor you to go into wherever you want to go, right? Find a person who is open to encouraging and providing you avenues with career and professional development about wherever you want to go. And these are the questions you should be asking very beginning during your interviews, after you think that most of the things have been taken care of in terms of your research credentials. Location, costs of living, just keep in mind where you're going, keeping all those things in mind. Salary negotiations, it was believed for a long time that in academia you cannot negotiate. It is possible. I don't know about UC system, but then other places where they don't have standardized system, salary scales, some people follow NIH scale, some people do not, there you can negotiate salary. There's also relocation expenses. I have heard some places, depending on what institute you're applying to, labs will do that. The two-body problem, which David mentioned about, when your wife was here and she had a job here, you wanted to come here. Keep in mind where you're going. You are able to use, I don't know, just, maybe in faculty they have spousal hiring, but I wonder if there's something in postdoc also. If you have a partner who's not doing postdoc, who's not in academia, then I think it'll take some time, but I think it can but you need to keep those things in mind. And mostly what happens is by the end of your PhD, and I think we're so busy, at least that's what happened to me. I wasn't even thinking of dating or going and getting married, but when PhD time came, my family's like, hey, you got your PhD, now what? So, just keep those things in mind. If you're international, just need to have this conversation with your PI beforehand, because if you're international, you got to go home and visit your family at least once a year, or for maybe at least minimum 3 weeks, because, depending on where you're from, it might take a long time to get there, and jet lag for a week, right? Visa sponsorship stuff, just make these things very, very clear in the beginning, and because that really removes a lot of confusion and miscommunication, which might come up later on. How do you find good postdoc positions? So gone are those days when you would send 50 emails a day and randomly just one generic script you have, and you just change the name from Dr. Singh to Dr. Fruman. But these days, I think even institutes are becoming very proactive. What they're doing is they're offering these postdoctoral orientation, postdoctoral recruitment days. So Chicago area is bringing all the Chicago-based universities together to hire postdocs. There's a form which potential postdocs and potential PIs, postdoc PIs, they fill a form and then they kind of do the matching sort of a thing. National Cancer Institute had started that. Stanford started that. I hope we'll be able to do that at UCI very soon. But I think I want David to mention that, because whenever we talk about it, David tells me that how many emails he's getting every day. I'm like, from whom? He said, these students or people who are writing, they don't even know what I'm doing, or someone is really good, but I wish they knew how to write an email to ask for a postdoc position. David?
Yeah, so it's important to keep it short because we all read 1,000 emails a day. And just, and I actually think the best thing to do is to have your PI send an email in advance. So it's not like applying to graduate school where you're one of 500 people who will be considered for interviews. It's people get maybe 3, 5, 10 qualified postdoc applications a year, and they get they do get hundreds of applications, but they want to be able to know in advance, you know, I should be looking at this applicant. So one of the jobs of your PI should be to send an advance email. So if the PI, if it comes from them, they'll say, postdoc candidate to recommend, and that I'll say, dear Dr. Singh, if you are looking for postdocs, please keep an eye out for an application for my student X. They're fantastic. It'd be a great, you know, asset to your lab. And chances are that they're more like the recipient is more likely to open it and read it, whether or not they know your PI. Oftentimes they will, or they will have heard of them. And then they will remember to and see your email a couple days later. And so that's what I would do. That's what I do for my students. That's what I recommend to everybody is have your PI as an ally, as a first point of contact. And then they'll say, I'd be happy to write a recommendation letter if with more details. And then you just write them and you say, yes, this is my name. This is what I've done. And I'm interested in your laboratory because of this project or these projects that you're taking on. If you're thinking about hiring, recruiting postdocs, please consider an interview. Here's my CV. Just keep it short. Yeah, that's about all I have to say. Yeah, most of the ones that frustrate me are like 3 or 4 paragraphs long. And if I'm not hiring postdocs, I don't want to read it, you know. And if I am, I would rather just look at the CV and then contact them and have a discussion rather than read a long email.
So now you're ready to apply for postdoc. You know, we asked this question about when should I start looking for postdoc, or like, well, you're ready to graduate, and you know, when do I start looking for postdoc? I have this image here. Whenever you see light at the end of the tunnel, start thinking about postdoc. But make sure that light at the end of the tunnel is not that of an approaching train, right? Which you can figure out what I mean by that. And you know, time is very important. Apply it as soon as possible. You know, in the sense, like what I mean by applying is start working on it. You know, just to come up with like, you know, narrow down a couple of labs where you really want to work, and having done a lot of background check on those labs and, you know, work there, publish and all that, it can take time on top of what you're doing in your research. And also you might be getting ready to like defend. So I think, you know, those you know, keep those factors in mind. In terms of finding, you know, it's these days, David can elaborate on it, it's becoming very difficult to find postdoc these days. Even if you're able to find, sometimes, you know, if you already had postdocs in your life, it's becoming difficult to afford postdocs because the postdoc salaries have gone up so significantly.
I think he means it's difficult for PIs to find postdocs.
Yes.
It's not difficult for
That's
applicants to find postdocs. It can be competitive, especially considering the higher salaries, but most PIs around the country are desperate for postdocs and have been for many years. And there's all kinds of commentaries in every conceivable journal about this. So if you're not sure, or if you definitely want to go for a postdoc, it is a good time. And also salaries are going up. So maybe the pendulum will swing because industry's not hiring as much and it won't be so easy, but again, it's a lot less competitive than it used to be to get an interest at least through an interview.
Yes.
I guess the question is, you were mentioning that there are industry postdocs as an option. So I suppose what is the benefit of doing an industry postdoc versus just applying to it directly? For example, I saw like NIH have like training programs.
So what's the advantage of an industry postdoc? It's really for people who want to go into industry and learn about the workings of it within industry, but while still doing somewhat independent research at a decent salary. So it's positioning themselves more for a group leader role within industry or other roles within industry, and doing a project where you have a lot of resources and robots to help you. So, you know, he talked about translational work. Typical postdoc isn't, you know, you're not screening drugs. That's another department or another person working next to you for salary. It's identifying targets using genetic screens, chemical screens, various kinds of ways of looking at a biological system and trying to identify a new target in a tumor microenvironment or whatever. So it's discovery-based research using resources that we just don't have in academic labs with robots, for example, and a division that'll send you a knockout mouse a month after you order it and that sort of stuff. So that's why people do postdocs in the industry.
And given that it's called postdoctoral training, so it is a training position. Also, I think, that's giving you training to actually, get absorbed into, let's say, if you want to do R&D and become a group leader within the industry, right? And also is a training for, as David mentioned, you can come back to academia because it is considered postdoc. I mean, nobody's going to, you're not going to be frowned upon that, oh, you were in industry, but I was doing postdoc in industry. So that's another advantage. Okay. So this is one thing which I want to add, having myself gone through this international scholar visa stuff and all that, that's another very important thing which you should keep in mind. There are some specific challenges you will face. If you're a PhD student, there's OPT, CPT options and all that. Explore all those things, keep in mind, plan ahead because those things kind of like take time, and talk to the international office, just always consult them what you're planning to do. There's a lot of chatter out there and then a lot of rumors about things are changing, this is going to happen, but always consult with people if you're going to make any decisions about things. Now how to really make the best out of your postdoc, David.
We have a minute left, so
I just want to quickly wrap up. Yeah, this is probably the last slide, which I've said in some form or the other. We have to publish, you have to write grants when you're a postdoc and build collaborations, go to conferences, meet people and talk to them and secure next collaboration, or maybe, just like somebody will remember you when you're submitting a paper review. I know I don't need to say it so explicitly, but that kind of how things can happen. Identify future mentors and again, see where your alumni is, whether you want to do a postdoc or you want to get into industry, just, track, if not your PI, everything is on LinkedIn. If you're connected to GPS 10, you can see alumni who went through GPS 10. And I think that's sort of a mechanism you should use. Use all the opportunities for public speaking, communication stuff and all that. Just really, what I did, I really made the best out of post. I knew that I'm not going to be a faculty. I knew that this is near where I want to stay. So after 5:30 p.m., my PI had no control on me and I was running wild taking care of my own career, right? Okay, so these are some of the positions which exist in academia. You might already know that. I'll share the slide deck. You can, see what more you can do in academia without doing, with just having done postdoc, without becoming a faculty member. These are some of the things you would be hearing all the time in GPS 10. This is the approach you should be taking as you're preparing for your career, whether it's academia or industry. And these are some of the resources which I've listed here. iBio came up with a really good video resource on how to really make the best out of your postdoctoral training. I would highly recommend watching. These are short videos. Follow NPA, Postdoc Academy, these resources, now so that you can be aware about what's happening in the postdoc world before taking a plunge into something, realizing that this is not what was for you. Well, bon voyage, enjoy, we're here. If you need any help, just let us know. Lauren is here, David, I'm still around. I'm happy to help with anything you need. Yes.
So you were talking a little bit about how easy it is to get a position in an industry or to get a postdoc, and it really depends on how industry might be doing. Well, dictate if you can get a position at a place. Is there a good way to get a pulse on how industry is doing hiring wise, so I can know what to expect if I'm going to have industry?
Can you answer that? Is there a good way to get a pulse on how much industry is hiring these days?
Oh, yeah, especially if you have a particular field that you're looking at, like an industry or a company. I mean, the best way to do it is to talk to people who are there, doing informational interviews, reaching out, connecting, having quick chats with them. What does it look like right now? What's that vibe? Are they hiring? Are they not? That's great, especially in industry. Informational interviews connect, and that way too, if the hiring